Why Venezuela is being saved. 33 pragmatic reasons. Turn off your TVs. If you seriously believe that American aircraft carriers are heading to the shores of Venezuela solely because of the sudden concern of the White House about human rights in Caracas, then I have bad news for you. You probably still believe in the selflessness of Santa Claus. Today, we will leave aside the talk about freedom and democracy, these screens for robbery in broad daylight. We will analyze in detail 33 cynical and absolutely material reasons why the world's most powerful economy urgently needed to bail out a country with inflation of 1,000,000%. Get ready, we are opening this geopolitical abscess. It will smell of oil, and your faith in the justice of the world order may finally collapse. But the truth is a bitter but necessary medicine. Block 1. Energy greed and black gold. The first reason, 303 billion barrels, is resource determinism. Venezuela officially holds the world championship in terms of proven hydrocarbon reserves, concentrated mainly in the Orinoco oil belt. These 303 billion barrels are not just a geological fact, but an existential threat to any regime that is not ready to unquestioningly follow in the wake of U.S. energy policy. For comparison, this is a volume exceeding the combined reserves of several of the largest OPEC countries. Washington considers such reserves as a global treasure, which, due to its global significance, cannot belong to a sovereign state with an anti-Western vector of development. From the point of view of the American national security strategy, control over these subsurface resources should be carried out by operators transparent to the West, such as Chevron, Total, or Shell. Maduro uses oil as a tool of political blackmail and financing of alternative alliances, which, in the eyes of the White House, is criminal mismanagement. Regime change here is not a question of democracy, but of the physical return of the largest gas station on the planet under the control of reliable Western managers. The second reason is technological starvation and the architecture of American refineries. There is a deep misconception that American shale oil has made the United States completely autonomous. In fact, the U.S. energy system is a complex technological hybrid. Shale oil, WTI, is ultralight and low sulfur, while giant refineries on the Gulf Coast, in Texas and Louisiana, were built in the 80s and 90s specifically for heavy, viscous, and sulfurous oil from Venezuela of the Marais variety. Converting these plants to pure shale oil will require hundreds of billions of dollars in investment and decades of downtime. Therefore, the American economy is experiencing a technological breakdown. They vitally need Venezuelan mud to mix with their light raw materials in order to get diesel fuel and gasoline of the right quality at the outlet. Maduro cut off this flow by forcing the Americans to purchase similar heavy raw materials from competitors, including Russia before the sanctions were imposed, and Iraq. Regaining control of Venezuela is a way to feed their factories with ideal raw materials at a minimum price, restoring destroyed technological chains.
The third reason is the operation to rescue Citgo assets and the exclusion of the Russian Federation from management. Citgo Petroleum Corporation is the jewel in the crown of Venezuela in the United States. It owns 3 large refineries and a network of more than 5,000 filling stations. When the Maduro regime found itself in financial isolation, it used 50.1% of Citgo shares as collateral to obtain a loan from the Russian company Rosneft in the amount of $1.5 billion. For the American establishment, this created an unthinkable situation. In the event of a formal default by Venezuela, a Russian state-owned company would gain legal ownership of critical energy infrastructure inside the United States. This is seen as a direct threat to national security. The overthrow of Maduro and the establishment of a legitimate pro-American government makes it possible to legally recognize debt obligations to Russia as null and void, revoke Rosneft's collateral rights, and leave Citgo in American ownership without paying Moscow a cent. This is a classic expropriation disguised as political expediency. The fourth reason is a lever for a controlled collapse in world prices. Oil is not only a commodity but also the main geopolitical weapon of the 21st century. The United States is interested in Venezuela as a tap that can be opened at any time. The current production in the country is at a historic low due to sanctions and equipment wear and tear. However, experts estimate that with the arrival of Western technology and investment, Venezuela will be able to increase production from the current hundreds of thousands to 5 to 6 million barrels per day in a few years. Such a huge injection of oil into the world market will inevitably lead to a collapse in prices. Washington plans to use this lever to finally strangle the economies of antagonistic countries such as Russia and Iran. If a barrel costs $40, the budgets of these countries will not be able to withstand the load, which will lead to internal protests and regime change already there. Venezuela in this game is just a tool, a massive weight that the United States wants to throw on the scales in order to break the back of oil-dependent opponents around the world. The fifth reason is the concept of Fortress America and the hemisphere's energy sovereignty. The doctrine of complete energy isolation of the Western Hemisphere has matured in the depths of Washington's analytical centers. The goal is to create a closed, self-sufficient cluster: Canada, sands; the USA, shale; Mexico and Venezuela, heavy oil. If these four countries work together under the political control of the United States, the need for energy imports from the Eastern Hemisphere will disappear completely. This will give the United States tremendous leeway. They will no longer need to maintain the Fifth Fleet in the Persian Gulf, negotiate with Saudi princes, or monitor the security of the Strait of Hormuz. Venezuela is the castle at the gates of this energy fortress. Without it, the architecture of American dominance in the New World remains leaky. The United States seek to turn America into an impregnable island that does not care about wars and crises in Eurasia, since all the resources for life and war will be under their direct control on their own continent.
Block 2. Chinese octopus in the backyard. The sixth reason, the elimination of the Chinese digital surveillance system. The Chinese ZTE Corporation helped the Maduro government implement the Carnet de la Patria Homeland Map system. This is not just an ID card, but a highly sophisticated social engineering tool integrated with databases on purchases, medical records, and political activism. Subsidized food and medicines are distributed through this card, which allows the regime to literally starve entire areas that do not show loyalty. The United States sees this as a digital gulag, and more importantly, a springboard for Chinese big data technologies. Through Venezuelan servers, China gets access to huge amounts of biometric and social information of Latin Americans, honing control algorithms that can be used tomorrow against the interests of the United States. The destruction of the Maduro regime is the physical dismantling of this digital network. The White House wants to rip Chinese microchips out of Venezuela's government system to prevent the creation of a digital China 2 steps away from its borders. The seventh reason is the blocking of the One Belt, One Road project in Latin America. China considered Venezuela as a key node of its global One Belt, One Road project in the Western Hemisphere. It was planned to build deep-sea ports, railways, and telecommunications networks that would link South American resources directly to Shanghai. For the United States, Latin America is an exclusive area of interest according to the Monroe Doctrine. Allowing Chinese logistics infrastructure to appear here means admitting defeat in your own region. The United States is acting preemptively. They want to physically block any attempts by Beijing to build hubs here through which Chinese goods and ideology will enter the continent. The coup in Venezuela is the construction of an invisible wall that cuts off the Chinese dragon from the rich resources of South America. The eighth reason is the blocking of the One Belt, One Road project in Latin America. China considered Venezuela as a key node of its global One Belt, One Road project in the Western Hemisphere. It was planned to build deep-sea ports, railways, and telecommunications networks that would link South American resources directly to Shanghai. For the United States, Latin America is an exclusive area of interest according to the Monroe Doctrine. Allowing Chinese logistics infrastructure to appear here means admitting defeat in your own region. The United States is acting preemptively. They want to physically block any attempts by Beijing to build hubs here through which Chinese goods and ideology will enter the continent. The coup in Venezuela is the construction of an invisible wall that cuts off the Chinese dragon from the rich resources of South America. The eighth reason is the blocking of the One Belt, One Road project in Latin America. China considered Venezuela as a key node of its global One Belt, One Road project in the Western Hemisphere. It was planned to build deep-sea ports, railways, and telecommunications networks that would link South American resources directly to Shanghai. For the United States, Latin America is an exclusive area of interest according to the Monroe Doctrine. Allowing Chinese logistics infrastructure to appear here means admitting defeat in your own region. The United States is acting preemptively. They want to physically block any attempts by Beijing to build hubs here through which Chinese goods and ideology will enter the continent. The coup in Venezuela is the construction of an invisible wall that cuts off the Chinese dragon from the rich resources of South America. The 10th reason: control over strategic raw materials, coltan and thorium. The Venezuelan region of Arco Minera de Orinoco hides riches that are more important than gold in the 21st century. It contains some of the world's largest reserves of coltan, a mixture of columbite and tantalum, and thorium. Coltan is a critical component for the production of capacitors in smartphones, laptops, and military electronics. Thorium is considered as the fuel of the future for new-generation nuclear reactors, safer and more efficient than uranium ones. China currently controls more than 80% of the global rare earth metals market. If the United States allows China to gain a foothold in Venezuelan fields, Beijing will have an absolute monopoly on the technologies of the future. The United States is seeking to seize control of these mines in order to provide its defense industry and Silicon Valley with an independent source of raw materials, without which any high-tech army will turn into a pile of useless iron. Block 3. The expulsion of the Russian bear. The 11th reason: the destruction of the Russian roof and the desacralization of military aid. For a long time, Moscow has been building the image of a global player capable of guaranteeing the survival of any regime that is ready for loyalty. The example of Syria has become a key one here. Venezuela is the Kremlin's main outpost in the Western Hemisphere. The overthrow of Maduro should be a lesson to the whole world. The Russian roof does not work where the United States decides to act seriously. Washington is trying to show that Moscow's support is an illusion of security that crumbles at the first encounter with real power. This is a strategic goal to undermine confidence in Russia as a military and political ally. If Maduro falls, every leader in Africa or the Middle East will think 3 times about whether to bet on the Kremlin, which has failed to protect its key partner in the Caribbean. The 12th reason: the liquidation of Rosneft's assets and the physical elimination of a competitor. The Russian company Rosneft has invested not just millions, but billions of dollars in Venezuela. These are not only loans, but also real physical infrastructure, shares in mining enterprises, drilling rigs, logistics hubs. A regime change to a pro-American one means an immediate legal attack on these assets. The new government, recognized by Washington, will declare all contracts with Russia corrupt deals of the dictatorship.
This will allow the United States to transfer ready-made, equipped deposits to American corporations, Chevron, Exxon, without spending a cent on exploration. In fact, this is a plan to expropriate Russian investments in favor of American business under the slogan of returning the national treasure. The 13th reason: the specter of the Caribbean crisis and the Tu-160. The appearance of Russian Tu-160 strategic bombers, White Swans, at the Maiketi airfield caused a cold sweat in the Pentagon. The possibility of basing Russian long-range aviation and fleet in the soft underbelly of the United States is an existential threat. The United States cannot allow the creation of a full-fledged Russian military base in Venezuela that could host nuclear submarines or deploy missile systems. The overthrow of Maduro is a preventive cleansing of the bridgehead. Washington wants to permanently close the issue of Russia's military presence in the region, turning Venezuela from a potential missile site for Moscow into an obedient buffer for U.S. security.
The 14th reason: the geopolitical exchange in the big game. In the secret offices of the State Department, Venezuela is seen as an ideal bargaining chip. The United States may offer Moscow the deal of the century, easing pressure on Ukraine or sanctions relief in exchange for Russia's complete withdrawal from Venezuela. For Washington, Caracas is now more important than many issues in Eastern Europe, as it is a matter of control over its own continent. Maduro is a piece on the chessboard that the White House is ready to eat or exchange in order to stabilize other fronts of the global confrontation. This is the cynical diplomacy of the zones of influence, where the interests of the Venezuelan people are not taken into account at all. Block 4. Financial sharks and old grudges. The 15th reason: 60 billion bonds and a feast of vultures. The Venezuelan national debt has become an instrument of colossal speculation. Large Wall Street hedge funds have bought up the country's defaulted bonds for next to nothing, literally for 10 to 15% of their face value. But these securities will instantly skyrocket to 100% as soon as the government changes in Caracas and sanctions are lifted. This means a net profit of 500 to 800% for the U.S. financial elites. For this scenario to materialize, Maduro must leave. The lobbyists of these funds in Congress are among the most ardent supporters of the democratization of Venezuela, because behind this slogan stands the largest insider deal in history to turn junk securities into gold bars. The 16th reason: gold in London, payment for the banquet at the expense of the victim. Britain has frozen more than 30 tons of Venezuelan gold in the Bank of England. The official reason is doubts about Maduro's legitimacy. In fact, this is a classic collateral retention mechanism. As soon as the West's henchman comes to power, the gold will be unfrozen, but Venezuela will not see it. This money will be used to pay debts to Western banks, purchase American equipment, and pay for consulting services of Western companies to restore the economy. This is the perfect robbery. The coup and the subsequent restoration of the country are paid for with money that was stolen from the same country under the pretext of protecting democracy. The 17th reason: the revenge of ExxonMobil corporations and historical revenge. For the American oil giants, Venezuela is a matter of personal resentment and huge losses. Hugo Chavez once severely nationalized the assets of ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips, putting them out the door. These companies have been waging legal wars for decades and waiting for the moment for revenge. Regime change will allow them not only to return, but also to demand huge compensation from the Venezuelan budget for lost profits since 2007. Corporations are returning not as partners, but as triumphants, ready to take everything, from wells to pipelines, at the expense of old debts and nationalized property. Block 5. Drugs, terror, and migration. The 18th reason: the cartel of the Suns and the legalization of intervention. The U.S. Department of Justice has accused Venezuela's top leadership of turning the country into a global logistics hub for cocaine traffic. Creating an image of a narco-state is an ingenious political move. This allows Washington to transfer the conflict from the political plane to the criminal one. Now, any military operation can be called a police raid to capture dangerous criminals. The United States uses the fight against drugs as a universal key that opens the doors of any sovereignty, justifying its presence of its Navy and Special Forces by the need to protect American teenagers from Latin American cocaine.
The 19th reason: ties with Hezbollah and the fight against Iranian influence. Venezuela under Maduro has become a backdoor for Iranian influence in Latin America. Allegations about the presence of Hezbollah training camps in the jungle and the issuance of Venezuelan passports to radicals allow the United States to include Venezuela in the context of the war on terrorism. For the White House, this is a matter of eliminating the Iranian network of agents on the continent. By removing Maduro, the United States is destroying the logistical bridge between Tehran and Caracas, depriving Iran of the ability to conduct operations and launder money in the Western Hemisphere. The 20th reason: the threat of the annexation of Guyana and the protection of investments. Venezuela's claims to the Essequibo region in Guyana provoked a sharp reaction from Washington, not out of love for Guyana, but because ExxonMobil drilling rigs operate offshore this region. If Maduro annexes this territory, American investments will end up in the hands of a hostile regime. The United States acts as a guarantor of peace, but in reality, they are simply protecting their new oil rigs from encroachments by Caracas. Removing Maduro is the cheapest way to resolve the territorial dispute and ensure that Guyana's oil flows in the right direction. The 21st reason: the migration tsunami as a political trigger. The exodus of more than 7 million people from Venezuela has become a powerful factor of pressure on the United States and its allies, Colombia, Peru. The White House has pragmatically calculated that it is cheaper to spend $2 to $3 billion on a regime change operation than to spend tens of billions annually on maintaining refugees, protecting borders, and combating the social consequences of the crisis. Migration is used as a humanitarian excuse. We are invading so that people stop fleeing. In fact, this is an attempt to stop a social explosion in their own region caused by American sanctions. Block 6. Big politics and personal ego. The 22nd reason: the Monroe 2.0 doctrine is the restoration of exclusive rights. For the U.S. political establishment, Latin America has never been a set of sovereign states, but has always been viewed as a backyard. The Monroe Doctrine, formulated as early as 1823, states that any interference by external forces in the affairs of the American continent is a direct threat to the security of the United States. In recent decades, the influence of China, Russia, and Iran in Venezuela has reached a critical mass, which effectively nullified this doctrine. Overthrowing Maduro is a demonstrative act of restoring hierarchy. Washington wants to show the whole world that the era of multipolarity is ending at its borders. This is a return to classical imperialism, where the United States is the sole arbiter and master in the Western Hemisphere, and the presence of outsiders is punished by the destruction of their allies. The 23rd reason: the votes of Florida voters are the inner kitchen of the coup. U.S. foreign policy is often dictated by the polling station map. The state of Florida is a key swing state, which often determines the outcome of presidential elections. Miami and its surroundings are home to a powerful diaspora of immigrants from Cuba and Venezuela who are extremely radically opposed to any manifestations of socialism. For any candidate for President of the United States, whether Democrat or Republican, promising to end the tyranny in Caracas is a direct way to win the votes of this electorate. Venezuela is being sacrificed to the internal American political struggle. Maduro must leave simply so that a particular politician in Washington can be re-elected for a second term, satisfying the demands of the influential Miami community.
The 24th reason is the effect of a small victorious war on the rating. In times of economic stagnation or internal scandals in the White House, there is no better way to consolidate the nation than a spectacular military show. Venezuela is an ideal candidate for a quick and clean victory. Unlike Afghanistan or Iraq, there is no religious fanaticism here, but only a hungry army and an unpopular leader.
Beautiful shots of American Marines distributing humanitarian aid in Caracas under the glare of television cameras can instantly raise the rating of the U.S. president to the skies. This is a cynical political strategy, using an entire country as a backdrop to boost the patriotic spirit of American taxpayers. The 25th reason: personal vendetta and the prestige of the superpower. In big politics, personal insults mean much more than is commonly believed. In his speeches, Nicolas Maduro repeatedly called the U.S. leaders cowboys, imperialist bastards, and used obscene language against the White House. For a superpower claiming to be a global hegemon, such behavior by the leader of a third-world country is an unacceptable challenge to prestige. Public humiliation must be punished, otherwise other leaders may follow suit. The removal of Maduro is not only pragmatism, but also an act of restoring the face of American diplomacy, an object lesson of what happens to those who confuse freedom of speech with insolence towards the sheriff of the world. Block 7. Hidden Threats and Chaos. The 26th reason: prevention of a global environmental catastrophe. The ecological state of oil production in Venezuela is critical. Due to the lack of spare parts and qualified personnel, the underwater pipelines in Lake Maracaibo have become a sieve. Giant oil slicks are already visible from space. They are destroying the ecosystem of the Caribbean. If the process is not stopped, the oil will reach the shores of Florida and disrupt the tourist season in the United States. Washington sees this as environmental aggression. Regime change allows the United States to forcibly sanitize the industry, supply its own service companies, Halliburton, Baker Hughes, to repair pipes, and save its own coasts from pollution, for which Caracas is not able to bear responsibility. The 27th reason: the Somalia at hand scenario and gun control. The Pentagon is seriously afraid of a scenario of Venezuela's complete disintegration. If the regime collapses chaotically, the country will turn into a huge gray space where gangs, colectivos, and Colombian guerrillas will share power. The biggest fear of the United States is the proliferation of modern weapons, including Russian-made Igla man-portable air defense systems, or MANPADS, which can be used against civilian aircraft anywhere in the world. A controlled change of power through a coup or intervention is a way to take control of the arsenals before they dissolve into the jungle and turn the region into a second Somalia. The 28th reason: saving oil from dilettantes and technological audit. The global oil market is a club of professionals, and the United States believes that Maduro is spoiling the global commons with his incompetence. The appointment of military generals to the posts of PDVSA top managers led to the fact that the most complex oil formations were ruined by improper exploitation. From the point of view of Western technocrats, this is a crime against global energy. The United States seeks to forcibly manage Venezuela's assets in order to put them back into operation by professionals from Houston. This is the ideology of resource colonialism. Resources don't belong to those who live on them, but to those who know how to extract them effectively.
Block 8. Legal traps. The 29th reason, a $15 million head, is the criminalization of a leader. The U.S. Department of Justice's accusation of narco-terrorism is a legal masterpiece. This translates Maduro's status from a political opponent to a wanted criminal on the level of Pablo Escobar. Now, in the eyes of American law, any special operation to capture him in Venezuela is not aggression, but execution of an arrest warrant. This frees the hands of the special services and allows them to ignore international law, as there are no negotiations with criminals. The appointed reward is also a direct call to his entourage to commit treason. The United States is literally buying the president's head with budget money. Reason 30. The reanimation of the Rio Pact for collective legitimacy. The United States has skillfully revived the Inter-American Mutual Assistance Treaty, Rio Pact, which has not been used for decades. This allows Washington to assert that they are not a lone aggressor. Now they are acting as the leader of a coalition of Latin American countries that have agreed that Venezuela is a threat to the entire region. This creates a legal screen. The intervention is presented as a collective police action at the request of neighbors.
This deprives the opponents of the United States of the opportunity to accuse them of a direct violation of the UN Charter, creating the illusion of a regional consensus. Block 9. Why now? The 31st reason is the weakness of the army and the degradation of defense capability. An analysis of the intelligence shows that the Venezuelan army exists only on paper. Soldiers suffer from malnutrition, 70 to 80 years old equipment has no spare parts, and the S-300 air defense systems have turned into piles of iron without proper maintenance by Russian specialists. The United States understands that the risk of serious resistance is minimal. The moment is ideally chosen when the pretentious parades in Caracas can no longer hide the fact of the complete degradation of the armed forces. This is a pragmatic calculation, to strike when the price of victory is the lowest and the resistance is purely symbolic. The 32nd reason is the global chaos and the dispersion of competitors' attention. In 2025 to 2026, the world is in a state of turbulence. Russia is focused on conflicts near its borders, China is preoccupied with the internal economic crisis and Taiwan, and the Middle East is teetering on the brink of a major war. Global players simply do not have the resources and desire to fit in with Maduro at full strength. The United States is using this window of opportunity to resolve the issue with Venezuela quickly, while the rest have their hands tied. This is a tactic of blitzkrieg in the shadows, when global competitors are too busy to prevent Washington from restoring order in their backyard. The 33rd reason is the inevitability of the finale. The clock struck 12, and pragmatism dictates the transition from strangulation to surgery.
Bottom line, Venezuela just happened to be on a treasure mountain at the most inopportune time. If they talk about freedom in the news, remember that it really smells like oil and a lot of money. Taking into account the current events of early 2026, the U.S. operation to capture Nicolas Maduro and establish transitional control, there are three most likely scenarios for the further development of the situation. The first scenario: oil protectorate, direct control of the United States. In this scenario, Washington implements the strategy announced at the beginning of 2000, establishing transitional control until the elections are held. Politics: appointment of the provisional government. In fact, key decisions are made in the White House. Economy: the instant lifting of sanctions and the return of American giants. The injection of $80 to $100 billion into the infrastructure. The result: rapid recovery of production to the level of 1,300,000 to 1,500,000 barrels per day by the year 2027. The country is becoming a stable raw material appendage, and debts to China and Russia are being canceled. The second scenario: Latin American Libya, protracted chaos. This option is possible if forces loyal to the former regime and armed groups turn to guerrilla warfare and sabotage of oil fields. Politics: a deep split in the elites. The army does not recognize the transitional government. The United States is forced to get involved in a long-term operation. Economy: investors are afraid to enter the country because of sabotage. Production drops below 500,000 due to the destruction of facilities. The result: a new wave of refugees exceeding 8 million people. Instead of the golden prize, Washington gets a huge zone of instability right next to it. Scenario 3: pragmatic Chavismo without Maduro. Is a compromise option between the elites of Venezuela and the United States, mediated by regional leaders. Politics: transfer of power to moderate figures from the old environment who agree to the conditions of the West, ousting Russia and China in exchange for personal security. Economy: gradual market opening. The oil sector is recovering slowly as part of the elite retains control over shadow flows. The result: Venezuela remains in the orbit of influence of the United States, but retains elements of the former state apparatus. This avoids a major war, but makes the modernization process a long one.
The final forecast: the world will see an attempt at forced transformation of the country. Success will depend on whether it is possible to buy the loyalty of the generals faster than they organize resistance.